Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another edition of How to Raise, part of the Philanthropy Mastermind series. My name is Jay Frost. It's great to have you back here. Before we begin, of course, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank our sponsor, Evertrue Studios, a division of Evertrue, the global leader in donor engagement and fundraising intelligence. Many of you know that DonorSearch, which is now a part of Evertrue, has been supporting this series since back in 2016. So this is year 11. And we're very excited to be a part of the Evertrue universe now and working with them and releasing this series through Evertrue Studios. But you can still find all of our content. We'll allude to this later, and you'll find it in the chat through the DonorSearch website, which is available at donorsearch.net. And there are links to many of our programs, including everything for the past 3 years, I believe. And this program will be there too, along with a link to it in an email you'll be receiving after the session. But don't go away, because the real action is going to occur when you participate in the conversation, which I'm going to ask you to do right now by just saying hello or howdy, konnichiwa, aloha, whatever you want to say in the chat, just to warm that space up for one another, but also to let our, hello there, Julie, and Monica and Christine, thank you for doing that. It's great to see you all. I really appreciate that. It's great to see where you're from, but also it lets our presenter know that you're here, which part of the world you're from, that sort of thing. If you feel like also saying which organization you're with or what you do, I realize I didn't prompt you for that before, but sometimes that can be very helpful to our presenter. So feel free to use all that there. It's also a way to get to know one another since we're not in the same room together. And this is a virtual environment. That's one of the few ways we have to see who has a common interest. So we'll be monitoring that throughout, and I hope you will too. Now, another little housekeeping note on all this is you're going to see at the very end of the presentation today a little survey. And these surveys, we actually pay attention to them. This isn't like the last time you flew on an airline. So we're going to pay attention, and we're going to book everything we do in the next year based upon the kinds of things that you say. So we'd love to know what you think of today, but we also want to know what you want to see us present tomorrow. That will take you about 30 seconds to do. So please do complete that as you leave today. And one more final note there. You'll see that it's possible to learn more about Evertrue or DonorSearch. We won't be talking about the companies today unless our presenter chooses to mention them for some reason. But if you'd like to learn more about them, and we would encourage you to, they're great companies, you can do that by simply noting that on that survey. There are also some QR codes at the end of the presentation, and there will be something in the chat for you. But this is all about you and, of course, this topic. And that is this idea about the great wealth transfer. And if you're anywhere near my age, you know that this has been a term that's been used for a long time. And the calculations have been all over the map. But we all knew one thing. This was enormous. This is probably the most important factor in what's going to happen to philanthropy. That's why this session has been called by our presenter, A Practical Guide to Optimizing the Silver Tsunami, a great phrase which I'm hearing used more and more. In fact, that was the title of our last podcast episode. What annual, mid-level, major, and planned giving programs need to do today to benefit from the great wealth transfer. We're going to define all that today, but also give you lots of practical insights into this. Or I shouldn't say we. She will do so. That is our presenter, Catherine Pooser, MPA, CAP, Director of Planned Giving at the Cancer Research Institute. Catherine recently joined CRI after serving as Director of Planned Giving at NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, where she built a planned giving program. And then before that, spent more than 5 years at the Environmental Defense Fund. She's been in a number of really wonderful institutions, but if I read her whole bio, you will never get to hear from her. We will make sure you have links so you can learn more about her work and possibly support the work she's doing in her new organization. But with that, I would like to pass the baton with great pleasure to Catherine.
Thank you, Jay. And thanks to all of you who have already joined the chat and who are here. Your time is such a gift to me today, and I hope that we can make the most of your time by not only sharing great information, but answering your questions. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started. All right, so today we are thinking of this in 3 parts. One, we're going to define what the Great Wealth Transfer is and talk about the demographic and economic situations that have created the Great Wealth Transfer or set us up to have the Great Wealth Transfer, I'm going to talk to you about some donor stories, because when we learn the stories of how the Great Wealth Transfer is happening, it becomes stickier and it becomes way more practical to us. And finally, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm doing now in my practice to make sure that my charity does not miss out on this huge, huge transfer of money. So what is the Great Wealth Transfer? Well, it's been changing, as Jay mentioned. When we talked about this 5 years ago, we thought it was about an $84 trillion transfer, and now it's looking like 123 trillion or more. If the market changes dramatically, maybe that'll be different. So it's an evolving thing, but the crux of the matter is we have so many people who are part of the silver tsunami. Last year, we had peak 65, where we had 4.2 million Americans turning 65 years old. And of this aging population and the amount of wealth that's being transferred, we anticipate that about 15% is going to go to philanthropy, which equates to about $18 trillion. So let's go over what are these generations that we're talking about. Here are some celebrities that are in the same age. I don't know that anyone would feel comfortable saying they are the representatives of the generations, but here's what we're talking about. We're talking about the silent generation. Baby boomers are our main focus in this presentation. They're followed by Gen X and millennials. Half of the wealth in our country is held by baby boomers. Half of it. So they have huge decisions to make in the next 20 years as this great wealth transfer happens. And our charities want to be part of their thinking and their conversation as they make these choices as to what to do with half of the economy. Does anybody know who Willie Sutton is? And I'm trying to see if I can see the chat. I can't. Here we go. Does anybody know who? Okay, so Willie Sutton is this famous bank robber. So congratulations that you guys do not spend your time learning about famous bank robbers. But he said, go where the money is and go there often. So today we're going to talk about where is the money, and it's not in cash. That's the highlight of the presentation. We also know that wealth has grown tremendously in very unexpected ways. We're going to talk about how that happened and what that means. Finally, we're going to dig a little bit into IRAs and donor advised funds. How is wealth held in the US? Well, as I mentioned just before, it is not held in cash, and this is how wealth by the 99%, so by most people. We're not talking about the tremendously wealthy folks, but the next slide we will talk about those folks. Real estate is 36% of holdings, and retirement is 37%. So those are two important buckets to be considerate of as we're talking to donors. And this other 5% is another place where we're going to talk about small businesses and other things people may be holding that they don't realize could be benefiting the charity of their choice. This chart is so old, but it is so correct. So if anyone ever sees a better version of this chart, please share it with me. But it basically is showing us people with a net worth of $10,000 down to $1 billion. And it shows us the percentage of their wealth that's held in different types of assets. The green is cash. So even those with a $10,000 net worth, their wealth is not held primarily in cash. Whenever we look further down the chart, we see people having other real estate besides their primary residency. We see them having business interests. We see them having assets that we don't really ask for on our annual fund mailing slips. So this is how wealth is held. let's talk about how wealth has grown. This chart, another favorite of mine, because it really shows the insane trajectory of the S&P 500 that people really were not expecting. We're going to talk about retirement assets, donor advised funds, real estate, and small businesses in this section. Before we talk about anything, though, we need to know this history. And this is something that has helped me in my fundraising practice because I now have the foundation to understand what's happening in the macro economy that my donors were experiencing, even if they themselves didn't really know that that's what was happening. Does anybody know what this car in the middle is called? Put that in the chat if you have any ideas. So before this car happened, we used to have defined benefit pension plans. And our silent generation family members and donors, someone got it. Thank you, Carolyn. It's a Studebaker. So the silent generation, they all were having defined benefit pension plans. And then what happened with Studebaker was they also provided a generous defined benefit pension plan to their employees. However, they collapsed and had bankruptcy and could not meet the obligations of their pension. It took about a decade since the collapse for the solution to be presented, but it was the ERISA, which is an act of Congress, and it was a law that created individual retirement accounts, where the trend then became defined contribution. There's an element of this that we're not going to go into today for this presentation, but it's worth mentioning that we left some people behind when we moved to defined contribution. Think of the different folks that you know in your world who are living paycheck to paycheck and don't feel like or can't make it happen that they would add to a retirement fund for themselves. So that's a bit of inequality that we are perpetuating when we use these defined contribution plans. Let's look at how money then from these defined contribution plans that were going into the stock market. We saw in the last slide, the stock market went bonkers, right? Let's look at some real money, what would have happened. So even when I was starting to save for retirement, and I'm a millennial, this kind of rule was if you save 10% of your income, count on 6% return every year, and spend 4% annually, you'd be cool to retire comfortably at your level of lifestyle that you enjoyed during your working years. So that bottom row there, 6% fixed annual return, that's the plan that a lot of people were on. You can see that the S&P 500 doubled the expectation. That's just the S&P 500 index. If you got into some of these popular stocks, these are not stocks that are, buried away and nobody invests in them. If you got into any of these stocks, you could be looking at 500 times return when you were expecting 6 times return. So we have a lot of people who have these windfalls that are sitting in our donor database. These people also lived with parents who were in the Great Depression. These folks also saw the rise and fall of markets. And so it's important to know this context, and we'll discuss this part later. It's more important to know what your donor really thinks about money, but understanding the broader history and the macro economy is going to help you communicate with your donors. This chart is something that I'm trying to use to show you that retirement assets have grown wildly. whether it was a defined benefit or a defined contribution plan. What's good about this chart is it shows us from 2000 to 2025. What I don't care for about this chart is that you'll see the time differences. The first, time difference is 2010 to 2000, or 2000 to 2010. Then it goes 10 to 15, 15 to 20. Then we go by 1 year for a little bit, and then we go by quarters. And so to look at this chart and think it's really apples to apples, it's not quite, because you have the factor of time that's not well represented visually, in my opinion. But nonetheless, what it tells us is that between 2000 and 2025, the rate of growth beat inflation by 2x. So driving home this point, people who were in the market likely saw returns they never dreamed of. How they personally understand that or take that is your job as the fundraiser, to understand what that means to them. So these retirement accounts have grown so much, and let's talk about what a few charitable options are that any fundraiser needs to have at their fingertips. The qualified charitable distribution in 2026, donors can give up to $111,000 each donor. So if a couple together would want to do a big gift, they could do $222,000 to your organization. The benefit of a qualified charitable distribution is that it helps donors reach their required minimum distribution, or RMD. And that is pretty much what it sounds like, but let me say what it is really. So required minimum distribution is, on their taxes, they are required to show the IRS that they took out money from their IRA, from their retirement account. They are penalized if they do not take that money out. There are plenty of people out there that need every dime from their retirement account to make ends meet, but there are also many people who are looking to get rid of this money so they don't have to realize it as income. When they give it directly to a charity, they won't pay income tax, and it lowers their income tax liability. Inherited IRAs are something that we're seeing more and more as the great wealth transfer continues. And this used to be a really fun way to inherit money, because you used to have 40 years to take out the money. But now people only have 10 years. So there's a big difference between when you can spread out $500,000 over 40 years versus over 10 years. That's creating a tax problem for our baby boomer generation and those lower. The final piece is kind of connected to inherited IRAs here. So beneficiary designations are when a donor includes your charity as a beneficiary of their retirement account when they pass. Many people like to do this because it's one of the more tax-advantaged ways to pass on assets to charity as opposed to your individual heirs. So that is our little section on retirement accounts. The next place a lot of this money has gone, this glut of money that's happened, is to donor advised funds. There's an entire other debate and plenty of presentations about donor advised funds that you can learn from, and discussions you can be a part of about the morality of them or the use of them or anything. But for this presentation, I just want you to see the first chart, or the first bar graph, and the last one. 2003, 96% of gifts to philanthropy were going to operating charities. By 2023, 60% of those funds were going to donor advised funds, and 40% were going to operating charities. So when we talk about a huge tsunami of funds coming to the charitable sector, there may be some intermediaries, including these donor-advised funds. The other element that's changed since 2003 with donor-advised funds is that the funds are far more accessible. As a practitioner, I've seen this change where in 2003, it would be gifts of $10,000 or more, usually coming from a donor-advised fund. And today, it is not uncommon to see people make a $50 gift out of a donor-advised fund. The last area that I want us to talk through about, where wealth is held is in real estate and small businesses. Home prices are exceeding the growth of our income. And that is, again, another discussion, but it's locking a lot of people out of buying homes, but it's also making people feel trapped inside homes because they're very house rich, but the market is high. And so they feel like they shouldn't make a move. And so this would be an asset that they would save until they finally pass. The other thing that's happening is we have 6 million small and medium-sized businesses that are going to change hands or dissolve. Small and medium-sized businesses are the lifeblood of many rural communities, and they employ almost half of the US workforce. And so in addition to what is going to happen with these small businesses, we also have an uncertain future for our workforce, depending on how these small businesses change hands. But relative to our primary discussion today, it's important for you and your organization to understand if taking on an interest in a small business is something you would do. Before the person liquidates their small business, if they gave 5% to your charity, they could potentially make the biggest gift of their lifetime to your charity and not really see any, aside from all of the work they put into building it, it might not really impact them in the end. I see Mona has a question that says, how much was it per person? And I'm not sure what that means. So if you want to ask that in another way, I'll be happy to answer. So that ends our area where we're talking about, oh, thanks, Lee, where we're talking about the economic and demographic drivers. So here's our calming wave, and we're going to move into our donor stories. The psychology of wealth really matters, and I previewed this concept before. It doesn't matter how much money someone has, it matters how much money someone thinks they have. So there are a few questions that I like to ask donors to help me understand how they are feeling about their wealth. Was your family impacted by the Great Depression? This really helps me understand their full thought process on money. Did you have someone that modeled charitable giving to you? How often do you check the stock market? You all probably have your own stories about donors who are driven by the market's moves in a day. And then finally, what is the best money lesson that you've learned? These are questions you can ask anybody, not just people in the baby boomer generation, not just people that you're thinking about talking to about a planned gift or a gift through their will or trust. This is setting a foundation for your relationship that helps you understand where they see themselves relative to their own wealth. So let's talk through a few examples. The first, all these pictures, just as they say on on the TV shows and such. These are all representatives. These are not the actual people. So the first person was a person who actually worked for our organization, and his friend passed, and his friend left a trust, and a third of the money from that trust was to be designated to charities that our former alumni was a part of. And so the other part of this story is the friend was a reporter who, for some reason, decided to buy Apple stock and had a $9 million estate, never planned to have that much money. Certainly didn't feel like he knew what he was doing in his lifetime to give it to philanthropy, and didn't want to set up the structure during his lifetime. So he created that trust, the philanthropic trust, in which he designated some of the money, and then he asked a friend to designate the rest. The next photo is about an intern that one of the organizations I worked for, the intern came to us and said, my aunt has passed and left a $30 million trust that the relatives are supposed to figure out what to do next with very few instructions. And that example I'm sharing with you because it's another windfall situation, but it's I don't know how the aunt made her money, but the intern is just like, well, now what am I going to do? And so they're going to go through the process of creating the entity to give this money from. They're going to come together as a family. They're going to decide how often they're going to distribute, who they're going to distribute to, all of these things. And so that news of on one day is probably going to be 3 to 5 years before we realize any gift. The next person bought a stock that did very well. They called me on December 27th and said they wanted to do $1 million CGA, that they could afford to do an outright gift, but they didn't feel like they should just give the money away. They felt like that it was probably more prudent for them to receive lifetime income. And so we made it happen with just a few days left of the calendar year. We were able to get that CGA done. The next donor is a couple, and the second meeting I had with them, they just came in and told me everything that was on their balance sheet. And it was a really productive meeting. Not all donors are going to do this. So they said, we have this much in a donor advised fund. We live off of a charitable remainder trust. We have 2 daughters. We're still wondering how much they're going to inherit and how they're going to be incorporated into our philanthropy. So what they ended up doing in the short term is making a couple of gifts right out of their DAF to our charity. And then they made a pledge that would be supported by their qualified charitable distributions. We couldn't write it that way. Qualified charitable distributions and donor advised funds have very similar rules about pledge payments and event attendance. So I hope your ears perked up about that. And so they used their qualified charitable distribution to make some major programmatic investments. The next picture are 2 sisters whose dad bought some land in a rural part of the state, and he bought it in 1929, which incidentally is the year my grandmother was born. My old grandmother was born. And so they really didn't know what to do with the land. It's increased in value by a ton. There have been colleges built up around this land. It's in a mid-sized city now. So we talked with them, their attorney, their accountant, and we looked at what it would look like for them to give the land directly to 2 different charities. What would it look like for them to put it in a trust? And what would it look like to put it into a donor advised fund? Ultimately, they decided to put the land into a donor advised fund. They also had an element of 2 nieces, 2 children from the 3rd generation, in which they were concerned about one of them getting a lump sum of money. And that's something that I hear over and over again with donors. Not that they don't trust their family, but they're concerned that their family won't be able to manage a lump sum. The final person is a person who has now passed. She told us that she was going to include us for $25,000 in her will. Our research indicated that she was a person of high capacity, and we stewarded her as such. Ultimately, I guess I should also say we would reach out to offer an annual meeting in person, and she never accepted it. Ultimately, her estate was $90 million, and she gave a handful of charities about $6 million each, unrestricted, didn't want a ton of stewardship. But the other element of this is we were not the only charity in that will, and that's something I see over and over again. So when we're stewarding our Legacy Society members, the idea that they will just always be there is not true. And we really do need to let them know that their gifts matter, that we continue to make an impact, and that we're a going concern. All right. Elizabeth asked about donors paying for event sponsorships with DAF limitations. I hate it when people answer it this way, but I'm going to. You really need to talk to your legal counsel about that. It's really a matter of what your charity is comfortable with, and your donor. I want to share this example of a billionaire and a teacher. They both supported their an organization during their lifetime, and one of them left. This is the same nonprofit organization. Mm-hmm. Yes, this example is. So the billionaire made consistent $100,000 gifts annually to the charity. When he passed, he left nothing in his documents. His foundation remains open, and his children are taking over the foundation. During his lifetime, he didn't make an effort to have his children meet the charities that he was supporting. We had a teacher, and both of these happened about the same time. So if we were paying attention to the first part where I'm saying over time money grows so much, this is in the same, 3 to 5 year time frame. So these people are giving annually. The teacher is giving $250. I think $500 was her biggest gift. And then she left a portion of her estate, which became a $1.4 million bequest. Both of these gifts were really important to the organization. Both of these donors were really important to the organization. And I don't want the takeaway here to be that that the teacher wins because she technically gave more. The takeaway here is that our patterns of philanthropy are very individual. And we want to respect donors wherever they are, but we also need to understand that every person is going to make the decision that's best for them. Here's a similar concept in another example. There's a woman that I worked with $20 million of net worth that worried all the time about outliving her money. She would give $1,000 a year, but that's all she would ever be interested in giving. And then another woman who had a $2 million net worth, she was very strict with her budget and made sure she had only $25,000 annual income so that she could give 5-figure gifts to charity. So those are some donor examples. Let's talk a little bit more about what donors are thinking about as they are part of the Great Wealth Transfer. And I haven't heard a donor yet tell me, as a person who's part of the Great Wealth Transfer, or because I'm in the Peak 65 group, blah, blah, blah. we don't think of ourselves in this way. And so even though these big trends are happening, we're all still doing this on a one-to-one basis. So things families are thinking about. 70% of women are going to outlive their male spouses. That's important to know. And it's also important to know that whether or not someone is their official spouse, whether or not someone it's a heterosexual relationship, we need to be talking to the full ecosystem of a donor if we want to be a part of the bigger decisions that are going to happen within this great wealth transfer. There's a lot of data out there that talk about how confident millennials are to give away this money. They're very focused on social responsibility, social impact, measurable results. That's a very different outlook from the silent generation and baby boomers, where there's a lot of loyalty, dynasty thinking. So there's going to be naturally some infighting within families about what should be done with money. And like the example of the intern, like the concept I just talked about, philanthropy is being used as a tool to bring families together. Here are some questions that donors are asking themselves, whether they're not, I don't know that you'll get into this with them. I don't know that you'll be talking to them about this, but I certainly have talked to donors about almost all of these things. So how and where will I age? It costs relatively a ton of money to be in assisted living. So when does someone want to start doing that? If they want to start doing that, home health care is very expensive. And, a lot of people that I work with, their feeling is that they haven't needed it so far. Why would they need it now? Why would I add a $50,000 annual expense to my budget? And it takes away some independence, which really matters. Who will my executor or trustee be? There are plenty of people out there, especially people who are philanthropic, who have no children and don't feel like they have a close enough bond with anyone else to become their executor or trustee. Parents are talking a lot about how much is too much when we talk about inheritance. These huge gains that baby boomers saw, remember, they were raised by parents who were part of the Great Depression. So there are definite philosophies around inheritance and money. It would behoove you to look some of those up about does the person want to set their kid up for life? Do they want to provide nothing at all? And I didn't put this question in here, but just in talking to donors, I've just asked, like, what's your style for how you're going to pass your legacy on? You've obviously taught your children so much. You've modeled so much to them. What's your style for what they will inherit? And they can answer that question. And then, do I feel I can give this away? Over and over again, we see people with assets that were given to them, but they don't feel still that they have the autonomy to support the causes that matter most to them. A good example is the spouse, the widow, who still feels an obligation to her husband's alumni or her husband's alma mater. So that, I think, is our wrap up of what our donors are thinking. Yes, that's the wrap up. We're going to move on now to exact strategies that we can use. And I hope that you continue to share your ideas in the chat and share your questions in the chat. So no matter which revenue channel or stream that we're working with, here are some truisms that I've found. One, donors give what they think your charity can handle. There are plenty of incredible missions out there. I worked at several global nonprofits and had a federated model where people would give to the local chapter during their lifetime and then make their ultimate huge gift to the national office because they didn't see that their local office could handle a $5 million gift. But they did believe their local council could handle $25,000 annually. Donors are relying on your website. It's donors of every age are going to go onto your website. So your website is not a vanity project. It's something that donors really depend on, and that's their first way of talking to you often. Of course, there are exceptions, but it really is an important tool for your fundraising. So I just really encourage you to be a part of your website team and look at it through someone who's never seen your material before. That sounds like very simplistic advice, but when we think about the context of the great wealth transfer, what we have are people with holding a bunch of money that they don't know what to do with. And they're going to start with some online research, and your charity's website is going to play a role in that. Generational differences in giving. We just talked about that with millennials appreciating measurable social impact, whereas boomers and the silent generation tend towards dynastic and loyalty. When we talk about our appeals for funds for our charity, we don't want to just talk about what we're going to do or why we do it. We want to talk about how the donor can make it happen, how the donor can give, the charitable vehicles they can use. If you can get a few more people to give through their qualified charitable distribution this year, you're going to increase your annual fund giving because they're going to give you more out of a bigger account as opposed to their checking account. Finally, in this great wealth transfer, this is another seems like fundraising 101, but think about it in the context of the great wealth transfer. People are going to stay engaged and interested and stay supporting your organization if they feel connected and if you're creating community. There are plenty of places out there they can give this money, so you need to figure out how you're going to stay connected with them. So let's go into specific donor giving channels. And we'll start with our mid-level and annual fund strategies. This slide I stole directly from MarketSmart, and Russell James is a guru in the planned giving space. The biggest myth we need to bust is that a planned gift intention increases our revenue and not decreases it. So a lot of people think planned giving, talking about the great wealth transfer and bequests and all of that, that's going to cannibalize our annual fund. In fact, it increases giving. When we think about asking for planned gifts, we want to look at frequency over capacity for our annual and mid-level folks. I use this car guy here. You guys all know these guys that flap in the wind. And I don't mind if I'm offending anybody, but I thought I might be. But all too often, our annual fund is a crisis sounding thing. It's this, we need money now, or here's what we're doing today. So we need to integrate some long-term impact into our annual fund appeals, and not just impact, but staying power. Reinforce that we are going to be here in 15 years because people are thinking about that as they're thinking about the assets from the great wealth transfer. Katie, good question. Volunteering as an indicator for potential planned giving, 1,000 times yes. If someone's volunteering That's just as good as money when we think about indicators for planned giving potential. They're voting for you every week. So yes, we need to offer our options for our annual and mid-level donors who say, I wish I could do more. They can, and we can show them how. We want to apply social herding. So we want to use peer stories to inspire action. I really think that the Donor Advised Fund and the IRA QCD are your top stories to tell for having people increase their annual gifts and mid-level gifts. I think those are the asset buckets that you want to be kind of promoting to this group. I wrote determine relationship management here because I've seen this in practice where a mid-level donor starts talking about a gift of non-cash assets, and then who is going to handle the relationship? Is it the mid-level giving program person? Is it the planned giving person? And then it's possible that that person gets over communicated with or under communicated with. And so working out your internal structures and internal thinking before those things happen are going to help you out a lot. Let's move on to our major gifts, major and principal gifts. For as long as I've been looking at this study that the Bank of America does, there's always this perception gap where wealth managers say, oh, we bring up philanthropic giving with our clients. And clients always say, only 25% of them say, oh, yeah, they did bring that up. So there's a gap. So I have a picture of a tree falling in a forest, because what happens if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it? It doesn't make a sound. Noise isn't made. So we have a special place as the charities to close this gap, to bring up these concepts. If there's one thing you do to your major gifts team, for your major gifts team, is just ask them to ask this one question, and it opens up all the assets. How do you plan to fund this generous gift? Now, this next slide is all about what happens if they answer that question. What happens if they answer that question is we need to have a gift acceptance policy that guides us as to what we're going to do when people offer us different assets. Does your charity want an antique car? Do they want a snow cone stand? Do they want land with environmental hazards? Do you know? It's not up to you to decide generally, but it's up to you to bring it up with your organization so that you're prepared when donors bring it up to you. Likewise, as an organization, you need to figure out if you want to be raising to endowment. Do you want to be offering naming opportunities? Which transformational projects are out there? There are plenty of donors who want to do transformational things, but if we can't provide them with the transformational ideas that are bigger than our major and principal gifts. Think about someone who has their lifetime of work and they're ready to give you $10 million. And if you just say that we want you to put that in an endowment and we'll spin off the interest and use it for operating expenses, that is going to be a dud. So think of some transformational projects that that your organization could do. Also, we want to talk about how are we going to treat people who give their ultimate gift during their lifetime. So this is going to look like a major gift when it comes in, but it's also their planned gift, their ultimate gift. This is it. Ceola Montgomery is this beautiful woman right here. She was a washerwoman in Alabama. I think it was Alabama. It might be Mississippi. But she walked into the university one day and handed them $150,000. And I think this was in 1996. She went on to get a presidential medal and said, I want to build a scholarship fund so that people in this area have the opportunity that I didn't. She saved and saved and saved and created that scholarship. And that was her ultimate gift. And she clearly made it during her lifetime if she walked in and handed it to them. So think about how you're going to treat people who give their ultimate gift to you during their lifetime. let's wrap up with our planned giving best practices. Making estate information available on your website is really, really important. Financial advisors, estate attorneys are coming to your website. They charge in 6-minute increments, some of them. Please do not let your donors get charged $500 because their attorney had to bounce around all over your website and then ultimately had to email your development@yourorganization.org to find out your tax ID number. So make that super easy. Every layer of hardness in that process just decreases your likelihood of actually getting into that estate. You want to provide sample bequest language for your donors' convenience and clarity, right? You don't want to be receiving gifts that you can't actually follow through with. You don't want to have to disclaim someone's gift because they gave it to a program that you will never do again. Let's focus on gift intentions from living donors when we're talking about our legacy society and not just our realized gifts. People want to be a part of a vibrant society and have that connection. I've mentioned this before, but these gifts are revocable. So providing consistent stewardship really matters. Why is there a picture of Will Smith eating spaghetti? Because I want to take a moment to think about how we're going to use technology for our planned giving donors. This Will Smith and spaghetti test has been what AI developers have been using. And the first ones were just, terrible. And now they're, they're really great. This is, I was not eating lunch with Will Smith. This is really just an AI thing. And I want you to treat your plan giving donors like you would your great aunt. You wouldn't send her AI junk because she's a real person and she could sometimes, if not always, tell that it's AI, but she can also always tell if it's really sincere. And so when someone includes us in their will or trust, it's like they've included us with their family. It's not like it is that they have included us with their family. And so we should honor that for them. So counting planned gifts, verbal commitments. I would always steward someone who tells me anything. As far as counting, you do what's right for you, but it never hurts to thank someone. And the worst thing that happens is they say, I've changed my plans, and that's all, and that's fine too. Yeah. So I feel like the last question that I see in the chat is not one I should answer. So Jay, I'll pass it back to you.
I had to stifle my laughter there. So you're leaving it to me to answer that tough one, I guess. We've had a lot of sessions on AI-related things here, and there are a lot of different opinions on it. I think when it comes to images of Will Smith eating spaghetti, that your donors may find that a little bit lazy or at least unrelated. But AI is used in lots of different ways. And in fact, there are a couple sessions that we've had on DAFs, actually more than a couple. Many sessions on AI-related things in fundraising, and you also name-checked Russell James, and he will be returning to the series on July 8th. So I just want to let everybody know that if you enjoyed this, and I'm sure you did, that you'll be able to learn a lot from Russell James as well, and he really leans in on the data. So it'll be a great companion to what Catherine is sharing today. And I know you have other questions, so please do put them in the chat and we'll be able to tackle them now. But before we do, I want to just give you a preview about what's coming up. And also to ask you a couple of quick favors. The first, once again, is a reminder. You're going to see a survey as you leave the room. Please fill it out. It's only going to take you 30 seconds, I promise. If you're interested in knowing about the services of our sponsor, that's great. That's a way you can find out. They would love that, I'm sure. But you can also let us know what you want to see and hear in the programs that we are booking in the future. So please do let us know what you want to see, and we will make sure this is built around your needs and your interests, just as we've tried to do for the last 10 plus years. Second, keep an eye on your inbox, because we're going to be following up this session with an email with a recording, or a link to the recording, as well as a link to these beautiful slides that Catherine is sharing, so, or PDF of them. So you'll see all that coming to you. And if you don't see it, it just means you've got to, I guess, whitelist the material coming from our sponsors. And if you need any help with any of that, for that matter, you can always reach out to me. You can reach me on LinkedIn, or you can reach me at j.frost@evertrue.com, and Jack will put that in the chat. And then third, the last favor I promise to ask for is consider subscribing to the YouTube channel so you don't miss upcoming episodes like that one with Russell James. We have this program, How to Raise, and you know what that's all about, but also Frontlines of Social Good. Next week on that program, we have the new Giving USA results with the chair of AFB, with the head of the fundraising school, and other guests. It's something we do every year. It's usually quite a large crowd. Please do consider joining us for that. It's a lot of fun, but you'll hear about all those programs if you do sign up for the YouTube channel as they make their way on there. So now let's jump back into any questions that you might have. And there are no questions that are bad questions when it comes to this stuff, I can guarantee you. So is there anything that you see popping up, Catherine, that you want to address, or any other final notes you want to make?
I don't see any other questions that we didn't answer. I do think AI has a place in philanthropy. I just want us to be very thoughtful as we engage donors, because
Yes,
they deserve our utmost respect.
absolutely. If you were going to summarize a lot of what you've been sharing today into, a couple key takeaways, what might those be?
Well, Jay, you're putting me on the spot, but for me, understanding the growth of retirement plans and the inception of retirement plans also helps me understand why it's so troubling to get the gifts from retirement institutions, the big institutions that when someone leaves a charitable beneficiary designation, that process is getting better. But so the key takeaway, there is tremendous asset growth out there, and we need to be prepared to take different types of gifts besides cash. And we need to work within our organization to make sure we are ready when donors offer things like the business they've been working on their entire life. I see a question. How about inviting older children and donors to participate in these conversations? Oh, I invite children of every age to participate in the conversation, especially after the gift is made. I think it's a great time for the children to be a part of the stewardship. If you're going to send a report or invite the donor to a lunch to celebrate the gift, why would we not invite the people who are most important to them?
Looking to see if there's something else here. Oh, it's about the YouTube link. So, Jack, I'm sure you can put in a link that will bring people right to the YouTube page. And if you're looking for if you like to listen to these sorts of things, in this case, I would have not advised that, because this is something you want to see. But for our other programs, sometimes listening is exactly what you need. And so the podcasts are also carried on all the major podcasting channels. I did want to ask you, Catherine, as we're closing up, though, if what you've seen as the biggest change in all this over the arc of your own work, because you talked about how the numbers have changed up and down in terms of the great wealth transfer and the way it was calculated. In fact, I remember back to when people talked about it, 114 trillion when I was starting. So those numbers are changing, but also people are, the cohorts are kind of changing in size, and their assets themselves have changed. And in fact, I think the time when I started in my career, there were twice as many public companies, more than twice as many as there are today. So there are a lot of factors at play. What's the biggest change that you've seen, and what kind of impact has that had on your thinking about this whole area?
Yeah, lately I've really been thinking a lot about the role of a philanthropic advisor. That role as an independent consultant outside of an attorney, outside of a wealth manager, outside of a charity, that is really burgeoning, right? Like it's really something that is happening on the scene. And for me, watching the public side of this respond to the Great Wealth Transfer is informing my practice, right? So I'm trying to understand what information are donors getting so that I can be relevant in the conversations they're having. So it's not uncommon for me to ask my parents to forward emails that they're getting from a financial advisor or to see what's in their mailbox because I want to understand how is the baby boomer generation being communicated with?
I almost wish that I'd asked the audience about the generational piece here, because even among the three of us on the screen, we have a Gen Z, a millennial, and a boomer. So our experiences are complementary rather than at odds, because we're all trying to figure this out. It looked like one more question, if you'd like to take that before we close.
Sure, yeah. And it's that, is there a reason to have a minimum amount for a bequest or legacy gift? In my mind, no. I don't know why there's not a much marginal cost to steward another person, and people give what they can. And so, what we had the billionaire and the teacher, right? And that was a big portion of her estate. So we want to honor her for making such a big commitment.
Thank you again for this, Catherine. Really do appreciate it. It was great to have you go through all this and give us not only an update, but had all the practical tips on how to make sure that this works for us and that we're being thoughtful about all of the people out there who are our donors and potential donors who are trying to figure this out themselves. Really do appreciate it. And I want to thank all of you for being here and joining us and joining in the conversation as well. We appreciate that. And thank our producer, Jack Frost, there in the background, who has been answering some of your questions. He also will have some links you'll see right afterwards, so you can take a look at those and click through, perhaps by using, of course, your phone, to some of the QR codes or just using some of the links in the chat. And please, again, fill out that survey. We would really appreciate that. And the last note, just to thank EverTrue for doing the work that they do and for sponsoring this series. We couldn't do it without them. Anyway, we'll look forward to seeing you all next time, and probably for the Giving USA section next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Until then, take care.